Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a wrap up. It's been a few months since I've actually done a wrap up. I didn't do August, September, and now October's over, so I'm gonna try to put all the books I've read these past 3 months into one video. Before I start, I am a little sick. I did already take some medication, but I have a stuffy nose and I'm a little tired, but for the most part I'm okay. So I'm just gonna sound ridiculous this video, which is normal for every video, honestly. I want to be able to talk about each of these books, but I also want to get through them because it is 31 books and it's a lot. Anyways, I want to get through every one of these books and at least say something unique to them, so it's not just a basic generic review. So yeah, I'm just gonna get into it. I usually would do stats, but I'm not really in the mood to do stats. Yeah, it is what it is. I kind of divided this video into sections. I didn't want to do like chronological order or based on ratings. I have a few. The first section are books that I already talked about in other videos, so I'm not going to go at length about those. I have one video where I talked about Carrie. I read the book. This is my first Stephen King book that I've ever read. I vlogged it. You can go watch my full thoughts over there. Overall, I was surprised at how much I really enjoyed this. I thought I was going to like it, but I actually really did like it, and I got really attached to Carrie as a character, so I will link the video down below. Also in August, I did a video where I read a bunch of reverse harem romances, and I talked about those at length, and the books in that video were Hate by Tate James. This is a new adult dark romance where we follow one girl, 3 like romantic interests. Overall, I really liked this. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I also read House of Vampires by Samantha Snow. Terrible book as a romance. Terrible reverse harem. Do not recommend. I also read Gilded Mess by Colette Rhodes. This was a really like fun, lighthearted read. Enjoyed it. This is a Goldilocks and the Three Bears reimagining. It was fun. I also read Queen Takes Nights by Jolie So Burkhart. Very intrigued by this story. And I also read Of Moons and Monsters by Willow Hadley. Surprised by this one as well, and I really enjoyed it. So go watch those videos if you want to know my thoughts on those books. So that's 6 books out of the way. Let's talk about books that I did not rate for one reason or another. The Motorcycle Diaries, Notes on a Latin American Journey by Ernesto Che Guevara. So this is actually a book that combines all of Che Guevara's journal entries when he went on this trip across Latin America, and this takes place before Che Guevara is most known for his rebellion in Cuba, where he helped like overthrow the Batista government. I guess the most notable thing about this book is the interactions that Che had when he was coming across, you know, day laborers or the people who were suffering in these Latin American countries. Che Guevara and his friend who he went on this trip with, they were med students, and they did come across a lot of people who had leprosy, so that's also something that he encountered. I think the general consensus of this book is that this is kind of where we start to see Che Guevara's Marxist socialist ideology start to form. So yeah, I didn't give it a rating. It is literally his journal entries, so it feels weird to rate them. I wouldn't also necessarily say that you need to read this in order to like get a good understanding on Che Guevara and socialism and Marxism, but it is like nice supplemental reading to kind of grow your knowledge on specifically Che Guevara as an individual, not necessarily the concepts of socialism or Marxism. So I have another book that I did not rate because I DNF'd it, and that is Murder at the Flamingo by Rachel McMillian, I believe. I picked this book up because I was looking for a mystery thriller, but also historical mystery thriller. I believe this book takes place in the early 1900s. I believe this is also a series, so I was also looking for a series to like have on my TBR like continuously if I ever wanted to pick something else up. But I didn't like this. Premise is that we come across 2 individuals who are starting new paths in their life. They're starting a new journey in their life. We follow one woman who is kind of like a socialite heiress type. I think her family's like responsible for setting up railroads or something. Like they're very wealthy, and she's kind of that kind of debutante type woman. That's how she grew up, but she wants more agency in her life, so she like dips on the family and starts a new independent life in Chicago, I believe. And then we also follow a young man who recently became like a full-fledged like lawyer, and in his first like case he kind of freezes up in front of the jury, the judge, and realizes that like this is not the job for him, and he has a lot of anxiety, so he leaves his life in Canada and they both end up in Chicago. I'm pretty sure it takes place in Chicago, and they get kind of entangled in this like brand new club that's opening called the Flamingo. I assumed that there was going to be some sort of mystery aspect, but I got like 40% of the way in and like nothing too major had happened. I think the author really took their time setting up this story, so much so that like nothing happened. That's like one of my least favorite things to say about a book is nothing happened, but the pacing was really slow, and I guess I just wasn't in the mood for it. This was an audiobook, so I just kind of wanted to like get going. I got 40% of the way through and like nothing interesting had really caught my eye. It was very dull, unfortunately. This next section is the series sections. I have 2 series to talk about. I read 5 installments of the Ice Planet Barbarian series by Ruby Dixon. If you've seen any of my past like wrap-ups, you know that I'm like, obsessed, like everyone else is. I'm obsessed with this series right now. It's like my comfort food, honestly. This is what's really gotten me through like these past few months. I always look forward to reading these because overall they're fairly good. Some are better than others. I read books 12 through 16. If you don't already know, the series follows human women who crash landed on this ice planet. They were abducted from Earth, and now they kind of are starting relationships with the local natives of this planet, and it takes place on an icy planet, hence Ice Planet Barbarians. Book 12 is Barbarian's Choice. We follow one girl who's, when we first meet her, she's actually like kind of like a preteen, but some time has passed and now she's like a young adult woman. I think she's like 22 in like Earth years, I suppose, and she hasn't mated with anyone and she really wants to, and then they have a visitor on their planet, and then romance. I just really wasn't into the plot of this book, and I really didn't really care for the love interest. He was Nick New, and I don't know, I just wasn't like swooning after him. It was fine like all the other books, but this was probably one of my least favorite. Didn't care so much about the romance either, and I didn't feel connection to our heroine either, so it was kind of lackluster overall. I also read Barbarian Redemption. In this book we follow one of the aliens who's been kind of unlikable for the most part of this entire series, and he asks a space crew to buy out some humans that have been trafficked throughout the galaxy, and bring them to this ice planet for their well-being. But a good chunk of this book was like going back and forth whether he did the right thing or not. He did buy humans technically for the purpose of like having a mate, so that was a huge focus in the book, and I just was like not vibing. I also really didn't like our heroine in this book. She's gone through a lot of stuff. She's very traumatized, and I do have huge sympathy for it, but like I want something light and fluffy, and I just felt so tired and exhausted with the trauma of both of our love interests. It was just a lot, and I just want fluff. Yeah. We had Barbarian's Lady, which was much better than the previous 2 books. We follow a young woman named Kate, who's a relatively like new woman on this planet. She was not one of the original women who crash landed here, and her like defining feature is like she's really tall, and she's very insecure when it comes to romance because of her height. This whole book I couldn't stop thinking about that really bad Netflix film about like that tall girl in high school who wears like Jordans or something. But anyways, there's a kind of like flirty, teasing annoyances to lovers romance in this one, and I enjoyed it much more. Yeah, this one was really cute, and that's like literally why I picked up the series, because I want cute romances, not like tons of angst. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. Barbarian's Rescue, love the romance in this one. In this one we follow another woman who's somewhat new to the planet. She's kind of like a chatterbox, really. When she gets anxious, she starts talking a lot, and then her love interest is like the strong silent type, like emphasis on silent, and I love that dynamic. It's like a somewhat different take on like the like optimist pessimist love trope that I personally really like. The chatterbox and the strong silent type, I love that dynamic, and we got that here. It's really cute. And then the last Ice Planet Barbarians that I read was Barbarian's Tease. In this book we follow another young woman who originally hooked up with one of the locals in like a one-night stand type of thing. He gets really attached, and she's not really sure how to handle this. She's not very good at relationships. This one did kind of have angst, but it was like more like romance-based angst, which I'm fine with. I don't really love when Ruby Dixon has to like expand the universe by adding like other conflict. I'd rather just have like the romance conflict, because that's all I want from the series is the romance. But understandably, Ruby Dixon does have to add in like external conflicts to keep the story progressing after 16 books, right? So yeah, overall, I really do enjoy the series. I wouldn't read 16 books if I didn't, but yeah, some are better than others. I also found a new like urban fantasy series to read. I love my urban fantasies, especially if they're like the supernatural paranormal kind, and I have The Others by Anne Bishop. I think this is a fairly popular series as well. I read Written in Red, which is the first book, and then the second book is Murder of Crows. This takes place in like an alternate universe. The premise of this world is that monsters have always existed, like shifters and that kind of stuff, and humans have always been seen as prey. At some point, humans in the Eastern world, so Europe, Asia, Africa, they cross the Atlantic hoping to find a world that didn't have these monsters, and they landed in the Americas, but there's still monsters there. So this story does technically take place in like North America, specifically the Northeast, I want to say, but it does not have like the same geography, I suppose, or like what's the word, like this does not have the United States of America, right? It has different types of settlements, especially since the supernatural characters are like the ones in charge. They own the land, they lease the land. They're the ones who charge for water, for rations and things like that. They are very much like the higher end at the pecking order, if that makes sense. They look at humans as meat, like walking hamburgers, I suppose, and they don't treat humans very well either. They kind of like tolerate their existence. In this book, we follow a young woman who has escaped from an institution. She is a blood prophet. She does have to like cut herself in order to have these prophecies, so like huge trigger warnings for self-harm. I really did enjoy the world building. I thought that was very creative. Usually when I read paranormal urban fantasies, the author typically just throws in the characters into the world. This author had created her own world and like added the werewolves and the shifters and the vampires. Also, each of these supernatural creatures aren't typically what you imagine, like the stereotypes. She added her own flair to them, so I really appreciate when an author kind of brings something new to like these already existing characters or creatures. I didn't physically read these, but the audiobooks were fairly long, like longer than what I'm used to. I think the first book was like over 15 hours, which is not normal for me. They might be kind of lengthy, and they are very like they do have a lot of like meandering, I suppose, which I really love when characters meander, when the authors add that in, but some people might kind of get bored. I enjoyed it, but yeah. I think an overarching storyline that we're going to see in The Others is humans trying to get more agency in this world, because they are, for the most part, treated like crap by the others, the supernatural characters. I'm excited to see where that goes. Some humans are going to try to be a little more diplomatic about trying to get more rights, and then I think some humans are going to be a little more radical about being treated better, that kind of stuff. So that's exciting for me. I love that kind of stuff in these urban fantasy series. Something that occurred to me when reading the series, because it is kind of an alternate history, I had to like ask myself, like, where are like Native American people? That sounds like a weird question to ask, but like in this world's history, the author is very clear that when the humans came across the Atlantic, it was just a bunch of like supernatural creatures. So does that mean that like Native American humans do not exist in this world? That's weird. Random point, but I think that's just weird. So this next section of the wrap up is probably going to be like the most boring, and that's like the okays. These books are okay. They weren't garbage, but they weren't amazing, so I'm gonna try to find something unique to say about them, so it's not just I enjoyed this book, it wasn't amazing, but it wasn't bad. The first I have is Empire of Empty Wars by S.M. Gaither. This is the last book in this Serpent Kings trilogy. I forgot what the series is called. I honestly only picked up the series to read the follow-up series, because that series has really beautiful covers and I was really intrigued, but this trilogy definitely has its issues. I'm kind of surprised I kept reading on to finally finishing the series. I think It took a while for the author to kind of like totally get their footing in this story. The first book was really hectic, and then over time I think the author finally honed in on like the story that she needed to tell and had editing done well. I've talked about the series a few times already on my channel, so I won't go into that much depth, but it's a pretty basic series with some like plot points that you've probably seen before in other YA fantasy series. So I think of this series as like a very basic, like fun palate cleanser of a series, where I don't necessarily think you're missing out by reading it, and I don't think you'll necessarily gain anything from reading it either. It's like literally the definition of okay. I also have Anna and the Alien by Honey Phillips. I picked this up looking for more Ruby Dixon-esque authors, and I think this name gets kind of thrown around in there a lot. I don't know if this was like some of her earlier work, but I really didn't vibe with this one that much. The plot is pretty surface level. We follow a young woman who gets abducted from Earth. I don't know what it was, but I was just really uncomfortable with certain aspects of the romance, and there's a lot of sexual assaulty, like grabbing, kind of feeling up alien things. I don't know, I just wasn't vibing with this one. I'm thinking that it's probably because it's some of her earlier works, but yeah, did not live up to a Ruby Dixon hype, which is not fair for her because Honey Phillips is not Ruby Dixon, but yeah, I just wasn't vibing. I also read Etiquette and Espionage by Gail Carriger. This is the first book in the Finishing School series. This is a YA series about a young woman who gets offered the chance to go to an etiquette school so she can be like a proper Victorian lady, and when she gets there she finally finds out that it's not only a school for etiquette but it's also a school for espionage. This takes place in a larger world that Gail Carriger has written in many times. I've read Soulless, which I believe is the first book that she published in this world. There are werewolves, vampires, and ghosts that exist in this world. My issues with this book, I mean obviously it's in the okay section, so I didn't hate it, but my issues with this book is that it's all very nonchalant. Like at no point was I ever like in the grips of like what's gonna happen next. I'm so anxious. Like even when our main character finds out that this is a school for espionage, it's almost like whatever, like who cares. She finds out that for some reason she's been asked to join the school, and she's like, okay, cool. Anytime that there was like some sort of like big battle sequence or an action sequence, it was very whatever. The author's writing is inherently that very witty, like Victorian thing that you sometimes see in authors that write in that era, so it is kind of fun in that way. Yeah, also didn't explain a lot of things. If you've never read a Gail Carriger book in this universe, then you might be like confused about like her world, because she doesn't really explain vampires or werewolves and all that kind of stuff or any other elements of this world. I think the author just assumed that you'd read her other books, even though this takes place like earliest in the timeline. So yeah, not a lot of explanation. I don't even know why this school exists. Like, who are they training these girls for? Like, do they work for the crown? Are they going to be independent contractors? Is this an independent business? Like, I don't know a lot about this world or this school. I also have They Wish They Were Us by Jessica Goodman. This is a YA mystery thriller. I guess you could say this is also dark academia. In this book we follow one character who's been part of this like elite social clique in her private school. She's a scholarship student, but she's managed to like be part of like the in crowd, the popular group of kids. I did remember enjoying the story overall, but like once I put down the book and like continue reading something else, I didn't really remember too much about this story. It was kind of like fun in the moment, but like not super memorable, which is why it's in the okay section. What can I say about this book that isn't a generic review? I suppose if you're just looking for some really good, like enticing, like kind of popcorn like esque book, you're not looking for anything more than what it presents itself to be, I think this is a perfectly fine book. If you really like high school cliques, like rich people behaving badly, then you might like this. I'd actually forgotten like a huge premise of the story until I just started talking, but we follow a main character who is part of this in crowd, this like clique, and when she was a freshman her like best friend died, and the case was like closed pretty quickly, like the boyfriend did it, and then now she's a senior, so some time has passed, and she has reason to believe that like the man who was convicted of the crime, the young boy who, like, I think he confessed, might not have been responsible for her best friend's death. Next I have Bleeding Hearts by Emma Hamm. I'm always surprised that like Emma Hamm is not as popular in booktube as I would expect her to be. I think she writes a lot of books that, at least plot-wise, would entice a lot of like the YA crowd specifically, even though her books tend to be a little bit older, maybe like new adult. Yeah, she writes like a lot of fae stuff. I know she has Beauty and the Beast retellings, Little Mermaid retellings, goblin stories. Yeah, I'm just surprised she's not like super popular. Anyways, but Bleeding Hearts is the first book in a newer series. I think it's the latest book that she's published as well. This is gonna be one of 3 like companion books. We each follow a young woman who falls in love with a horror monster. In this book we follow a young woman who's like basically forced to work with the church, and her job is to like kill supernatural creatures for the church. This is supposed to be her last job. She's been told that she has to go meet this duke, prove whether or not he's a vampire, and then kill him if he is. So it's kind of like a Van Helsing type of thing going on. I believe this book was described by the author as Crimson Peak meets Dracula. I've actually never seen Crimson Peak, but like the vibes that film has given me from what I've seen online, like impeccable. So the story itself is fine. The romance is fine. I was never really like super attached to the romance. The writing is fine. Like everything's like fine. I think the biggest like letdown of this book was that like I did not get the gothic vibes that Crimson Peak or Dracula has. I did not get this here. It was a little more like lighthearted. I am still looking forward to the other 2 books in this series. I believe the next one is going to be a werewolf romance, and I think the third one's supposed to be like a Frankenstein inspired romance. I could be wrong there. And then the next book I have is Golden Chaos by Colette Rhodes. This is the sequel to Gilded mess, which I talked about in that reverse harem video. So this is the second half of the duology. Again, it's a very cutesy reverse harem romance. We follow a young woman who ends up in this relationship with 3 brothers who are bear shifters. It's very fun, very lighthearted. The author did introduce a kind of like outside antagonist to the romance, which I don't know, I just really wanted to focus on the romance, but the author added in some other like conflict for our main character and her relationship, so I wasn't super in love with that. This is why I hate talking about like 3-star like okay books, because there's only so much you could say other than like it was fine, didn't love it, the plot was okay, everything's fine. You know, it's like all very like basic and redundant. So now we get to talk about like disappointments and like the things that I did not like in these past few months. The first I have is The Empress by S.J. Kincaid. I think I gave this like 2.5 stars. I'm really disappointed in this book because I actually really enjoyed the first book, which was The Diabolic. I like gushed about that, I think, in another wrap up, but in this series we follow a woman who is basically created to be like a personal bodyguard. The author pitches this series as The Terminator meets Game of Thrones. I really loved the first book because it was like that perfect like political intrigue set in space, very dramatic. Like there's a mad emperor. In the first book I thought the author did really well at writing those like tense scenes where nothing like super like action heavy is happening, but it's a lot of like intense dialogue. I loved it. This book felt like a 180 for multiple reasons. First of all, there's a character that we've basically grown to like really trust. They've become a really like important character, and I think they're basically the villain in this book. And then also this book felt more of like a space adventure, where the other one was set in basically the like emperor's home in space. I don't know how else to call it, but like their hub. In this book we are flying from planet to planet, and then we're going through like a space jump, a wormhole, all this stuff is happening. And I'm pretty sure this book is shorter than the first one, so a bunch of stuff was happening. The plot was progressing so fast that it did not feel like the same story. The other one was like political intrigue heavy, this one was like space battles, and I was just kind of like really like overwhelmed by all the stuff that was happening. But then it left me underwhelmed because it does not feel like a great continuation of the series. I will probably read the third book just to finish it off, and I do really like our main character. Again, she's like a Terminator-esque character who, at the beginning of the story, all she really wants to do is to protect the young girl that she's like assigned to. I also have The Crimson Crown by Cinda Williams-Chima, so I did technically give this 4 stars, and it is a very solid book, but the reason I have it in disappointments is because this is the last book in the Seven Realms series, and it does not feel like the last book in the Seven Realms series. I would say that the progression of the series has been going up, and then by this 4th book it kind of stagnated. It's not bad, so it's not like it dipped. The ending was like okay, but it also felt like something else was gonna happen, which is true because there's the Shattered Realm series, which I've heard takes place fairly quickly after this series wraps up. So it was a finale of a book series that there wasn't, like, it just didn't have like that great ending that you hope for in a very politically charged series. So I did give it 4 stars because overall it is a good book. Like, it's well done, well written, all that kind of stuff, but it did not satisfy my needs. The next book is probably the biggest disappointment, and that is The Wretched of Muirwood by Jeff Wheeler. I've given like almost everything Jeff Wheeler has written like 4 or 5 stars. I really enjoy most of their work. In this book we follow a young girl who's a wretched, which is essentially like an orphan who doesn't know who their parents are. The author makes this distinction between orphans and wretcheds. They're essentially the same thing. I don't know why there's a huge difference, but this young girl works in a kitchen, and one day this man comes like stumbling into her kitchen, and she decides to like take care of him, keep him secret, because he has to like complete this task or something, and she gets involved. It's a very like basic one note story. It was very short. It almost felt like a novella. That's part of his Muirwood series, but I believe this is the series that really got him his start. Like, this is like his, like, I'm not gonna say his best series, but this is a series that really like got him some recognition. The main plot of the story is that our main character has to get this man from point A to point B. It's not very exciting at all. From the Jeff Wheeler books that I have read, there's like ups and downs and highs and lows, and I'm very anxious for our characters. I didn't connect to any of the characters at all. The plot was not very eventful, and I think this is the first book in this universe that he's written in, but the magic is not really explained so well, like the way the world works. I've read his other books before, so I kind of have a sense of how everything works, but if this is the first book you've read from Jeff Wheeler, I would be so like I'd understand why you would not continue, because I don't know, it just felt very like lackluster in like literally every department other than the writing. His writing is always solid, but plot wise, character wise, it's all very like lacking. I also have Dead Girls by Nekesa Afia. I'm very sad that I did not love this book. It has like all the elements that I really look for. It has a historical setting. It's set in 1926. So in this book we follow a young woman named Louise. Louise is actually like a kidnap victim survivor. When she was younger, in her teens, a bunch of women in Harlem were kidnapped, and she was the girl who got free and like helped free the other girls who had been kidnapped. So she kind of has a reputation of being like Harlem's hero, like that's her actual nickname, but she doesn't live up to any expectations that people have of her, especially her father. In this book she is, I believe, working at a cafe as well as a speakeasy. She doesn't like dislike her life. She actually has a good time where she works. She has a girlfriend that she can't be open with like publicly because homophobia, but she has a girlfriend that she really like loves. She has good friends, that kind of thing. But at some point, women in her community go missing and they turn up dead. And Louise gets involved in the mystery by a cop. I'm going to give the author the benefit of the doubt and say that the interactions between Louise and the white detective who essentially like forces her into this investigation, they made me feel very like anxious and tense, and I'm hoping that's what the author was going for, because if so, like, I felt very comfortable. I would say that the historical aspects of this book were very good. Like, if this was a historical fiction book, no mystery involved, I'd enjoy this much more. But the mystery part was like not good, in my opinion, like at all. The thing that, and I'm usually not a stickler for like, this makes no sense, like in the real world, it's a fictional book, so like I don't want to apply like real world rules onto a book, but like the detective essentially like forces her to like do like most of the investigative work, which, why? First of all, like, I don't get it. Like, you would assume that this detective would like look to her to be like a CI, like a criminal informant, but like no, like he has her doing like tons of legwork, and then he's like super disappointed when she's like, I don't know who's committing these crimes, like I don't know. We find out who the killer is like in a very like lackluster way, and then the rest of the book we are spent like trying to like gather information and like all that kind of stuff, like prove that it is actually them. I don't really like I don't care about that aspect of an investigation, like let's prove that it's them. And then when we find out why the killer does what they do, it's the most lackluster motive of all time. Like, it is Criminal Minds like 101, you know what I'm saying? Like why the setting, why these themes, why the story, and that's the reason why the killer's doing what they're doing. It doesn't feel special or unique to the story at all. I was looking through the post-it notes that I have in the book, and I have a few things. The reveal was disappointing when I talked about like revealing who the bad guy was. We know who did it about 60% of the way through. I said, and the end was a roller coaster of things, not in a good way. And I also have a note that says the author has a tendency to finish chapters in a really annoying, ominous way. Like, I waved goodbye to Hannah, and little did I know that was the last time I'd ever see her, ... And the author would do this constantly, and it was very like, I don't know about frustrating is a word, but it's kind of like, this doesn't seem well written. It led me to believe that the author was probably not very comfortable at creating suspense yet, which makes sense because I didn't like the mystery aspect, but I did like the historical fiction aspects. I also have The Amateurs by Sarah Shepard. I believe Sarah Shepard's the author of Pretty Little Liars. This book legitimately like pissed me off. Like, I very rarely like get heated over something like this. I actually don't like getting heated, like, period. I try to be as mellow as possible. So while the past books I've been discussing have disappointed me, like, this one actually like made me angry. And I don't like shitting on books because, one, if by some chance the author sees this video, like sorry, like, I don't want to like insult anyone because I'm sure they work really hard. I also don't want to like crap on a book if you happen to really like it and make you feel bad for your taste or anything like that. But like, this book, oh god, like, I got so pissed. So before I get into it, The Amateurs, we follow a group of new adult-ish age-ranged characters who are all part of like a forum Reddit-esque message board where they investigate cold cases, and they get together to solve this cold case about a young woman who went missing about a year prior. It was a very interesting like disappearance. Like, she disappeared within like 5 minutes. Like, it was a really like quick like, and then she was gone type of scenario. So this would have definitely been like in an okay book. Like, the mystery was intriguing, like, the story had me in its grip, like, the author did really well, like, with the reveals and the pacing and all that kind of stuff. Like, all that's fine, but the author did something towards the end that, like, I shit you not, like, if an author does this, like, you're like on my shit list. Like, I don't want to read any more of your books because I think this is so like crappy. Like, it really like bothers me. Like, I feel cheated. It's so frustrating. I don't want to spoil the book, but what I'm about to say like will spoil it in some way if you think about it too hard. So I will keep talking about the book, and I'll leave the cover of the book here, but if you don't want to be spoiled, then just continue on mute or like fast forward until you get to the part where the book is no longer on the screen, because I will try not to spoil it, but again, if you think too hard about what I'm going to say, then it's going to be a spoiler. So typically for mystery thrillers, the author has to be very like selective about which perspectives we are reading from, which perspectives are giving us certain information. I also know that sometimes in mystery thrillers right now it's really popular to have like unreliable narrators, which sometimes are well done, sometimes they're not. Like, if a character has a mental illness and they're not in the right state of mind, that could be an unreliable narrator. Or if the narrator has like substance abuse issues and they're not totally sober all the time, or the narrator is outright lying to the audience. So that could also be a factor in mystery thrillers. So in this book we have multiple perspectives. If I remember correctly, I don't believe that this narrator is, or any of the narrators are like aware, like they're oblivious to a reader reading their thoughts, right? You know how some books have the narrator talking to an audience? This is not one of those books. There would be absolutely no reason for any of these like POVs to like censor their thoughts. I don't know why I get so heated about this, but I hate when we are reading a character's perspective. They are, again, oblivious to like a reader, an audience reading their thoughts. They do not seem to be under any substances. They do not seem to have any mental illnesses that might hinder their competency and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's a straightforward POV. Tell me why. They are going through the entire mystery of the book. They are talking to people. They have tons of sympathy. They're like, I need to solve this crime. I wonder what happened, blah, 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 blah. And then we get to the end. And at this point, you're like, wow, these characters, they went through all of this, da, da, da. Like, I wonder who could have done it. And then it turns out that one of the POVs may or may not have done something bad. It ended on a cliffhanger, so I don't know, like, 100% what they did. But it's very clearly leaning that this character may have done something very, very bad. Why was this revealed at the end when there were ample amounts of times that we could have found this out? There is no reason why this character who is being questioned or who is asking questions about said mystery is censoring their thoughts. You know what I mean? Like, they are, and it does not feel like our narrator is withholding information, which characters do all the time. Like, characters withhold information. This feels like the author is withholding information, and I hate that, because the only reason why an author would withhold information, in my opinion, is to hold it for a reveal. That's cheap and that's lazy to me. I do not like that. You might feel like I am over exaggerating, or you do not agree with my like assessment of unreliable narrators or narrators in general, but like I do not like this. It just feels like I was cheated. I don't know how else to explain it, but I hate when authors do this. Another author did this in a very popular book, and I think that book won a Goodreads like award for it as well, and it like I got so heated. I do not like when characters withhold information for no other reason. The author needed a good reveal later on. I hate that. I hate that so much, and that's basically what happened here, in my opinion. Like, I hate to be dramatic, because at the end of the day, it's just a book, but it's like interviewing a serial killer, I don't know, like Jeffrey Dahmer, and being like, tell me about your crimes, and for some reason their mind is like a slate, like nothing is there. Why would they not at least think about what they've done? You know what I mean? Like, I just really don't like it, and I really don't want to continue the series. I'm almost done, so let's end the video with like surprises and like the better books I read in the past few months. Let's start with Gleam by Raven Kennedy. So this is an adult romance King Midas retelling. I've really enjoyed this series. I think the series has gone also really popular within the past few months. You might have also heard that this is also a Fae story. The Fae don't really come in until like the really end of the first book, so if that's what you're going in for, like a Fae romance, then you might have to wait a little bit. So in this book, our main character is the King Midas's like most prized possession. Like, she is gilded. She is like, she's gold. She's quite literally gold. They have a very different perspective of their relationship. She absolutely loves him and adores him and would do anything for her, and like her value is based on what he thinks of her, and it's pretty obvious from the reader's perspective that he treats her like an object. I would say like emotional abuse is pretty much like the basis of this relationship, but she doesn't really see that yet. I would say this story, like, really at its core is like, up until this point, like a self-liberation type thing, and it might get frustrating, especially books 1 and 2, where she still loves the king so much, but we as the audience can tell like he's trash for her, like he doesn't respect her at all. It is very graphic as well, so sexual content, that kind of stuff. I think there's also a rape scene at some point in the second book, but I went into the third book. I'd already enjoyed the first and the second, but I remember before picking up the third book, I was thinking to myself, is this really like that great of a series that I think it is, that it's being hyped up? So I picked up the third book, and like I really enjoyed this. Something about this book just like reminds me of like when I was younger, and like I would devour like every single book that my mom would buy me like at Target or whatever. I don't get that feeling all the time now, but I got that from this book. I just really like, this is like a really good series, like, for me. So I also reread Blood and Chocolate by Annette Curtis Claus. This is like my most read book, like reread book, like of all time. I probably read this like at the right time, like the stars aligned, like the perfect moment, which is why I've grown so attached to it over the years. I think I've talked about this book a few times on my channel, but we follow a young woman named Vivian, and she is a werewolf. I think she's like 16 years old. She's recently gone through a personal tragedy, a personal loss. Her father has passed away, and her whole pack has had to move from a very rural area where they can be themselves, and they now live in a more suburban area around more humans, so they have to like kind of damper down their like instincts, their werewolf instincts, I suppose. She's always felt comfortable with her pack, and she loves her pack, and she loves being a werewolf, but after her father passes away, and the circumstances revolving of that incident, she doesn't feel super comfortable with her pack. She feels very isolated from her pack, and then she's also never felt comfortable around humans because she's not human. She doesn't see herself as human even when she's like in her human form. So she feels very isolated, and then she meets a young boy who she thinks she might be able to tell him her secret, her being a werewolf. This is like a really nice coming of age story, just with like a werewolf setting, character, world. I don't think this would be well received today from a YA audience. There's some problematic aspects, not like other girl type stuff. There's also a romance, a big age gap, and I believe he's like 20 something and the girl is also a teenager. But again, I read this at a young age, and I don't know, it just stuck with me since then. So I do acknowledge those issues, but I don't know, I just have a huge connection to this book, so I reread it. And it makes me feel good to read this book. And then I also read Son of Neptune by Rick Riordan. I'm continuing on with the Heroes of Olympus series, which I never finished, though I know I have read this book before. Don't really remember much. Really enjoyed it. I love Rick Riordan's world. I love his humor. It's funny because when I was reading this book, I was thinking how the term like epic fantasies only really get applied to adult books, like adult fantasy books. But like, if you think about it, like the Percy Jackson universe that Rick Riordan has created is like middle grade, like epic fantasy, right? Like, it's a huge world. These series are fairly long, especially for like a middle grade audience, I suppose. I was really frustrated reading this. I enjoyed my whole experience, but I do get sometimes frustrated reading this because I do feel like Percy was kind of like nerfed a little bit, because if you've read the last book in the original Percy Jackson series and then you read Percy now, it's so frustrating to see him not being respected, and I'm just thinking to myself, these kids have no idea what they're in the presence of. Like, Percy Jackson, that sweet summer child that he is, has done so much for the world, and no one respects him in this new setting that he's in, and it grinds my gears. But obviously I know why, for the purpose of the story and the plot and all that kind of stuff, but it's like, how dare you underestimate Percy Jackson? But whatever. I also have And the Trees Crept In by Dawn Curtigage. I've been wanting to read this book forever. When I first heard the story or the plot, I was so intrigued. In this book, we follow a young girl named Scylla or Priscilla, and her sister move into her aunt's house. It's like located in the woods, and at some point she thinks that the trees are getting closer to the house. Not like trees are starting to grow closer, like they're moving closer, like almost as if they're like getting up and moving closer to her house. It's a lot of psychological horror as well, things going bump in the night and that kind of stuff. There also seems to be a kind of like Slenderman-esque character like hiding away in the woods, and it's frightening our main characters. So yeah, it's definitely like a very creepy book. I wasn't sure how I was gonna feel about it, but I'm gonna say it's a surprise. I just didn't expect this kind of story. I've read Dawn Curtigage before and I really liked her other book. This book had a lot of like psychological stuff, so it doesn't always read like straightforward kind of literal, which is not something I'm super used to. I don't really like metaphorical stuff. That does happen here. The ways the book is formatted as well has some interesting stuff. Like, we have like journal entries like this. We also have some like interesting like text formatting like this. So overall, we do definitely get a sense that our character is like losing her grip on reality. One thing that I thought was really interesting, so when this book takes place wasn't really confirmed until later on in the book, so the entirety of the time I was reading it, I was like, when does this take place? Because there is like modern technology So I was like, oh, it definitely takes place in like the 2010s at least. But also they talk about World War II, or excuse me, World War III. So I was like, maybe like Cold War era. But also the way people talk about like the land and like the town that this house is in, I was like, is it like feudal like England or something? Like the setting was never really clear to me until the end, and I think that was probably like purposeful on the author's part. It made me really uneasy. So I read 2 books from Don Kurtagich now, and it's interesting because the majority of the book will be told in an almost like metaphorical type of way, and then towards the end she'll like try to like conclude the story in a very literal like there's a proper explanation for all this haunting going on. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not going to say that it's like bad or good. It just depends on what you like or how you like your stories like concluded. But she does try to like give like a rational explanation for like all this going on when the majority of the book feels very irrational. So trigger warnings for domestic abuse, substance abuse. Our main character doesn't eat for quite a bit of the book, and I don't know if it's like a purposeful like anorexic thing, if that's what the author is trying to imply, but yeah, that as well. Death. It's a horror book, so it tends to be kind of graphic about these things. And then the last book is probably one of my favorite things I've read these past 3 months, and that is Nevermore, The Trials of Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend. The hype for this book and this series is like super well deserved in my opinion. It is such a cute, like cozy, quirky story, and I love quirky stories. In this book we follow Morgan Crow, who's been told her entire life she's cursed. The reason why things go bad in her city or her town is because of her. Like whether it's someone tripping over a shoelace or someone getting a heart attack, it's all her fault. And that's a really like shitty upbringing to have. Like anything bad in the world is your fault, which kids all like teenagers always feel like that in general, but like to like actually apply it like literally, then yeah, that sucks, and I feel so bad for her. But then she meets a young man. Is he young? I don't know how young he is, but this man approaches her and tells her that he can whisk her off to a better world, a better life, and she says like yes, of course, especially since when they meet she's supposed to die. Like she's been told that she's gonna die eventually, and she has to accept it, and she doesn't want that. So she gets whisked off to this world. Again, a really like quirky, fun setting, and she gets told that she could probably have a place in this world called the Wondrous Society, and there's a kind of competition aspect in order to get into this society. I didn't know going in that there's going to be a competition aspect. Most people just talk about like the unique world and all kind of stuff. I thought it was going to have like a school setting, but I think the school setting will be in the next book maybe. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. It's so fun. The characters are so lovable. I loved everything about this book, like 10 out of 10. Like well worth the hype. I loved it. This book gets compared to a certain series by a woman who shall not be named, and I understand the comparisons. The plot itself are very different, but the vibes that it gives off is very much that. I really enjoyed it, so 10 out of 10. Great way to end the video in my opinion. So yeah, so those are all the books that I've read during the month of August, September, and October. Feel free to talk to me in the comments about anything that I talked about. I will link all my socials down below, as well as some far more important links. Feel free to like, comment, or subscribe, or do neither. It's all cool with me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.